I said God had a plan. And even with Adam and Eve, if you remember that he covered them with the skins of animals, he could not get the skins off the animals without there being bloodshed. So he covered their nakedness. Not long after that, he instituted the tabernacle, and he instituted that the high priest would go in once a year and he would make atonement for the sin of the people. But let me submit this to you, that this was God's plan, but it was not God's perfect plan. Because God's perfect plan was not to ever cover sin. I need help here. Because if something is covered, it still exists. You can try to cover up a problem, but it doesn't mean that the problem is not there. So even though Adam and Eve were covered by the skins of the animals, their nakedness still existed. Their weakness, it still existed. And even when the high priest would bring the blood of bulls and goats, there was a covering to the sin, but the sin still existed until Jesus came. I said until Jesus came. Mary gives birth to the God child, Christ. And once again, I feel a preach coming on me here. Once again, the devil had to look into the face of a man that looked like Adam, a perfect man, carrying the likeness, the image, and the glory of God. Once again, he looked into the face of a man and was reminded of everything he wanted to be, but never could be. I can't get any help in here today. Every time he looked at Jesus, he saw a God-like man here on this earth. So he tried to do to Jesus what he did to Adam and Eve. He tried to exploit the weakness of his flesh and get him to fall and forfeit his God-like image. That's what you find in Luke chapter 4, as Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days being tempted by the devil. But through his temptation, the devil failed to get Jesus to forfeit his holiness, his righteousness, and his God-like image. And so because the devil failed, he was left with one choice, and that was to crucify him. If he couldn't get him to fall, then he had to get him off the scene. He had to remove him from the earth. And can you imagine the twisted and perverted joy that the devil must have had as he watched the crowd mock him, as he watched the crowd spit upon his face, as he watched the crowd smack their hands against his face? Can you imagine the joy that the devil must have felt when he watched the crowd cry, "Crucify him"? Can you imagine the joy that he felt when the crown of thorns penetrated his head? Can you imagine the joy that he must have felt when the nails pierced his hands and his feet? Can you imagine the joy that he must have felt when the flesh was being ripped off of his back? These actions were the sum total of the devil's hatred and feelings towards the God-like man. But beating him, spitting on him, mocking him, it wasn't enough. He had to crucify him. And when Jesus said the words, "It is finished," and he gave up the ghost, hell went into a rejoicing party, because the devil now had erased the only reminder of what he wanted to be but never could be. The only God-like man, I feel like preaching here right now, the only God-like man that was on the earth was now removed. So now there was not a man in the image, a man carrying the glory, a man carrying the likeness. He had erased the memory of the only man that reminded him that man is everything you ever wanted to be but never could be. But what the devil didn't realize, I said what the devil didn't realize is that when he went into that grave, it was not a high priest, it was the high priest that didn't go into a temple made with hands, honey. He went into the Holy of Holies. He went into the heavenly Holy of Holies. He went into the holiest. I feel God in this place. I said, I feel God in this place. There is a reason why when Jesus said it is finished, that the temple was destroyed. Because the temple was a type, it was a symbol of that which was in heaven. So when Jesus said it is finished, there was no longer a need for the earthly temple. There was no need for a temple made by hands, because he was not going into a natural earthly symbolic temple. He stepped in to the real Holy of Holies, and he laid his blood at the mercy seat and said to the Father, my blood cries out to you. Don't cover their sin, erase their sin. Don't pardon their sin, justify their sin. I need someone to get on their feet and give our high priest some praise and thanksgiving.